What's up, guys? Here we'll be talking about probably the most important, one of the most iconic figures in martial arts, and what people consider the godfather of mixed martial arts because of his thinking and his philosophy of mixing up styles, not just taking part or sticking to one specific martial art, deeming that as the best martial art or the best way to actually go about defending yourself. And of course, we're talking about Bruce Lee. In this specific video, we're going to be covering the sparring or the quote-unquote fight between Bruce Lee and two of his students. This is the only footage that shows the reactions of Bruce Lee somewhat and him in action rather than choreographed movements and attacks like in movies. This is with his students. There are moments in a few of these exchanges that get the instincts of Bruce Lee out there, and he actually gets hit a couple times in these sparring matches, showing that to me it doesn't seem like it's choreographed, doesn't seem like it's rehearsed. A lot of things seem to just be off Bruce Lee's instincts. Now, we have to mind that this is 1967. I'm not trying to claim that me showing this shows that Bruce Lee can compete with the UFC fighters of today or the martial artists of today. I'm not really saying that at all. But it will show that his skills and his reactions for the time is actually ahead of its time. When you think about 1993, the first UFC event with Royce Gracie, with many of these other one-dimensional martial artists that came from different backgrounds to compete with each other, Bruce Lee's reactions are even better than some of theirs that I've seen. And this competition right here, this sparring thing right here, was over 20 years ago before UFC 1. What we see from Bruce Lee in this, when he goes against his students here, he always, of course, kept a very wide stance. To have a lot of options to move back, which he naturally would do in a lot of these exchanges, he would always move back to counter. He never liked to move forward too much. He liked lateral movement as well, but he didn't move like a lot of people would think he would move. He wasn't super elusive, but you can see that his balance is insane, and he's very quick on his feet as well on reacting, which tells you that he could be very elusive if he wanted to. When you see an opponent move like this, it's a sign that this opponent, this fighter, is planting his feet and he's going to have power in every position. And he always kept a very long distance between him and his opponent, for kicking range, of course. And he's always able to see things coming from that distance when their opponent tries to attack from that initial point. And he always kept his lead hand, which is mostly his right hand, forward. But I do believe Bruce Lee was right hand dominant. So this shows that he was really reliant on the lead kicks and the jabs, especially. That's what you see here. His line of defense is that front leg, especially the side kick, and the jab. Very quick techniques to get their opponent away from you. But the thing about Bruce Lee in this, he doesn't use the jab like you would see boxers use. He doesn't throw it out there constantly to set up something or get an angle on his opponent or just keep him away by constantly throwing it out there. When he threw his jab, he threw it very stiff. He threw it as if he was going to try and knock his opponent out with it. And when he throws a jab, he doesn't move, he sits on it. He stays in place and just thrusts it forward at his opponent. You notice the whole time his lead hand is forward, similar to what Conor McGregor does in MMA. He puts his fist forward and extends it, because Bruce Lee is around 135 pounds, roughly, and he's about 5'8". He's a pretty long 135-pound man, so he uses that reach to his advantage. And what he uses that for is to barricade his opponent from coming in on him. He makes him take a detour. He makes him take another angle to attack him. And he eliminates one entry movement from his opponent, which is directly forward. So they have to go left, they have to go right, they can go under the lead hand, or they could swipe away the lead hand. But this is all what he wants. You see a couple times his opponent will try to swipe away the lead hand, and he would move his lead hand out of the way of the swipe and catch him with the jab as they're entering on him. Of course, his opponent, his attacks were a little bit too linear. They were a little bit too obvious. And that line of defense, like I said, that front kick is an amazing check. He throws it so quick, and he doesn't throw it like many people today throw it. He throws it with a lot of power and a lot of snap and speed. Because people, when they throw a side kick, they pretty much put their knee in and they throw their heel up. This loses a lot of power and a lot of speed. It could be unpredictable sometimes, but it's not an accurate shot. But what Bruce Lee does is he lifts his knee up, chambers it, and then explodes and snaps with it. And a few times, Bruce Lee is very quick to switch stances to close the distance. Because when you switch stances, when you go back, you're creating more distance. When you're going forward, you're closing distance. Because you're almost like walking, right? And he's very quick to switch, either if he's moving back or if he's moving forward. Whenever he sees his opponent open, he switches stances to get that angle to close the distance on his opponent and potentially land a strike on them. And what people would probably think about him, he is not one to not taunt his opponent. He likes to play mind games with his opponents out there, even with his students. You see him taunt his opponents. You'll see him put his head out there for them to hit him. You'll see him start waving his arms, switching into different types of stances after he throws strikes to almost intimidate them. And he creates those moments for himself to get an angle on his opponent or halt the action just enough so he can reset himself. Watching this whole video, you will know that Bruce Lee is naturally a counter striker. He doesn't like to lead. He likes his opponents to open up on him and then he'll strike quickly, because even in these, his movements and his kicks, especially in his jabs, Bruce Lee has real speed on him. Especially toward the end with the second student, when his opponent goes and throws that right hook and he drops it, Lee sees that opening and he throws a right roundhouse head kick while his opponent's punch is still out there. And it's extremely quick. One of the fastest Lee leg roundhouse kicks I've ever seen. And even when his opponent would catch him or land a body kick on him while they jump in with a round kick to the body, Lee is so quick at catching openings with precise shots. There's moments where his opponent leaps in there with a round kick to the body, which actually catches him as Lee tries to land the jab, but his opponent would duck right under it and slip his head on the outside as well. It's a little bit too heavy of a dodge. And what does Lee do right after? While his opponent's head's down there, he goes in and attempts to throw a knee up. Of course, doesn't try to land it on his opponent because it could have been devastating. Given the angle, it's a little hard to see if the knee would have actually landed rather than the thigh. But if this was a precise shot, this could have been devastating. And Bruce Lee was really good at adjusting as well. Seeing the first time his opponent would duck after throwing the leaping body kick, because he knows that Lee would have threw the jab at him, he adjusted right away after. So what he would do is he'll leave his head out there for his opponent to attack him, and his opponent would leap in. And once he leaped in, he knew what he was going to do. He was going to go for the body kick. So what does Lee do? Lee fixes his mistake, because the reason why he missed the jab was because he waited for his opponent to get all the way in, not knowing what he was going to throw, because his opponent leaped in on him, so he waited to see what he was going to throw. And once he landed the body kick, then he threw the jab, but it was too late because his opponent was already ducking. Now what Lee did to fix his mistake is, when his opponent was leaping in, he already knew what to do. When his opponent's leaping in like that, he's almost defenseless. He doesn't keep his hands up or anything like that. It's kind of hard to do so when you're throwing a leaping round kick to the body, and he completely intercepts him with that jab as he's coming in before he even lands the kick. So he catches him before the kick even lands, rather than before he got hit by the kick and then threw it, because he didn't know what to expect. So he goes and catches him with the jab, but it actually doesn't land too clean, it looks like. It looks like it hits his headgear and then it rolls off of it, but it seems to still rattle him a little bit. Then, of course, his opponent is going to do his natural instinct, which is what he was already going to do, and he ducks to his left, like he did before. And what does Lee do? Instantly throws up the right head kick. Doesn't follow through with it, because, of course, he doesn't want to potentially hurt his student, but you see this would have landed shin to dome. This 100%, if this was a real fight, it would have been done. The fight most likely would have been done. Like I said before, I'm not here to say Bruce Lee is the greatest thing I've ever seen, the greatest fight I've ever seen. Of course, he didn't do everything right in these two sparring matches. He did get caught a couple times. He got caught by body kicks from the first opponent, although he would counter him with the jab, but he still gets hit by those body kicks. And there was one point where he almost got caught being a little bit too lax. His opponent came in to throw a turning sidekick, but he spun a little bit too hard and landed on the leg of Bruce Lee, as Bruce Lee would push him with his right leg, getting his opponent off balance, and then Bruce Lee would switch stances to get the angle on him. I still haven't seen much of this in the UFC, where fighters would create angles simply by just switching stances, as they would dodge their punches or get their opponent off balance. There's a couple times where that happens, but it's not too common. But what does Bruce Lee do right after that? He sits in a stance like he does a couple times throughout these sparring matches, looks at his opponent gets up, and what Bruce Lee does is he stands up completely straight, completely relaxed, casually just walking. He almost gets caught by the jab of his opponent, and Bruce Lee's reaction was there. He was able to quickly get away from the punch. He would slip back and almost deflect the jab of his opponent and step back as well. This is also one of the moments where you see that if Bruce Lee wanted to be elusive, he probably could, because his footwork here was pretty nice. Another thing, throughout this whole thing, Bruce Lee was always balanced. Never did he lose his footing. When he was throwing those head kicks, when he was throwing the jabs, everything he was throwing, he was completely balanced. That comes with good form, a lot of practice, and just pure experience, really, when it comes to throwing strikes like this and having someone push you, pressure you, and try to land strikes on you, and you always keeping that balance. But let's be honest, one of the reasons that Bruce Lee was catching his opponents so easily was because they left themselves open a lot of times, especially the second guy. His first sparring match, his opponent was leaping in there with those round body kicks. He caught him a couple times with them, but he left himself so exposed for the jab, for really any strike to the head. He would try to slip to the left every time he threw it. Both the times he did that, he would have got caught by a knee and he would have got caught by a head kick. And his other opponent had his hands down throughout the whole thing. There were times that Bruce Lee was trying to land right head kicks the whole time. Kept throwing them at him. Although Bruce Lee did have his hands down, especially his left hand, his backhand was even lower than his front hand, which is a little bit awkward. But Lee is a counter striker. He's a counter fighter. When you see his opponents, they look more like they're aggressive fighters, or they're more aggressive than Lee, because Lee was the one that was baiting them the whole time. And Lee's jab is a little bit weird. It's not an elusive jab. It's not a fluid jab. It's just straight power and speed. He tries to bulldoze you with that thing. He tries to just intercept you as you come in on him. He's good at catching his opponents when they try to cover so much distance on him, because he keeps a very long distance, and it's very powerful. You can just see the impact. You can just see the power he throws in there. He sits on it really hard. In today's world, it would be hard to catch someone like this, especially if someone's moving around a lot. Someone that's very elusive, able to move in and out and laterally as well. It's going to be hard to catch someone while you're sitting still like that, unless you slip their punch and then counter them, or if they're just desperate to land that big shot on you. You might be able to land it then. And another thing Bruce Lee did, he crosses his feet a lot when he's moving laterally. He doesn't almost shuffle when he's moving side to side. He likes to walk as he's moving left or right, crossing his feet. And this is dangerous to do because, one, you don't have power when your feet are crossed. When they're at that moment where they're crossed, you have almost no power, and you're almost completely off balance. They could just push you the other way and you would fall over if you're not fast enough to catch yourself. Due to Bruce being unbalanced here, he is very open to strikes. He won't be able to defend effectively. If they can land a high kick, let's say, and if he were to block it, he still might fall from the strike. But all in all, this is really fascinating. Now, a lot of people think that he was never a fighter. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know fighting, doesn't know techniques, doesn't know anything. When I look at this, I don't see that. Obviously, he has some experience in something. You don't develop these reactions and instincts just because. You develop them through many ways, by training, by actually drilling your techniques, by actually sparring, visualizing. Everything will develop these instincts. They don't just come to an actor like that. Now, is he the best thing I've ever seen? Is he the best fighter? Would he beat Dominic Cruz and Cody Garbrandt and Demetrius Johnson? I'm not saying that at all. Another thing you have to remember, this is 50 years ago. 1967. We're in 2017 now. This is 50 years of advancement and evolution of martial arts in general. And once it hit 1993 and on, the evolution was rapid. More than it's ever been. The UFC especially evolved martial arts in general more than any time probably ever. The last 20 or some years was just absolutely rapid for the evolution of martial arts. So imagine 50 years ago. This guy's doing things that people still do today. The side kicks to the leg, the side kicks to the body, to check their opponent, the elusive movements, keeping the hand forward to barricade the opponent. Everything he does, people still utilize today. The side kicks to the leg, the oblique kicks to the leg that Bruce Lee has incorporated in his movies too. They were not present in the UFC until like John Jones started fighting, and people like that started to incorporate and see how effective it really was. There was a time where people thought side kicks were worthless. There was a time where people thought don't even throw roundhouse kicks because you get taken down, because they don't work anymore. A lot of things that he was using out there, a lot of things that people think is just garbage, it just doesn't work, it's just a very wrong way of thinking about martial arts. For me especially, I don't think there is a right way of fighting. I don't think there is a wrong way of fighting. I think all techniques, besides the obvious ridiculous ones, can eventually work in a real fight if practiced and drilled to do so. For the longest time, so many fighters in the UFC in the quote-unquote golden age, there were people who always had this narrow stance and used almost no lateral movement. There were a few guys that did, like Chuck Liddell used a little bit of lateral movement, but there was no one like, let's say, Dominic Cruz today or Wonderboy Thompson. People like that. People were very worried about if you do that, you might get taken down easier because you're off balance more often when you're elusive than when you're just plodding forward and stuff. And now what you see, most people are elusive in their footwork. Most people. Back then, 10 years ago, most people were very static, very plodding in their movements. So yeah, Bruce Lee was amazing. That's pretty much the breakdown. That's pretty much the video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe. This is a very fun video for me to do. I have some other videos coming out soon. I have a lot of ideas. I have a whole list of videos I want to make. And my next video is going to be a prediction video for the UFC Fight Night card. And I also might have time to get out another video, a technique video. So be on the lookout for that as well. And again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.